Hello, welcome to another tutorial from BlenderCookie.com. My name is Tiago Nunes, and in this third part of this series we're going to continue talking about composition. We've already talked about framing your elements and how to balance them and make sure they grab your viewer's attention. Now it's time to talk about the elements themselves, the actual things that we portray on our image. So today we'll cover these compositional elements, and then I'll also talk a little bit about the importance of light and color in a well-composed image. So, elements first. When we talk about compositional elements, we're basically abstracting the objects or things in our image to points, lines, or shapes. Even if you blur your render in a way that you can no longer tell the details, you should still be able to recognize these elements, and it's actually their presence that makes your image look well put together. In fact, this is a pretty useful trick. Before you completely commit to your scene setup, try blurring it out or rendering it at a thumbnail size, like 10% of the final resolution. If you can still get what's going on, you've likely nailed your composition. If your image does not hold as a thumbnail, then it's not the detailing that's going to make it work. So when we blur out the image or make it really small, we're left with mainly those three types of compositional elements: points, lines, and shapes. You can think about them simplistically in this way. Points are things that should first grab the viewer's attention. Lines help lead the viewer's eyes around the image, and shapes give structure to your scene. I say that you can simplistically think about them this way because you can very well not have certain elements in your scene, and also because their roles are not exclusive. For example, lines themselves can call the attention, but let's keep it simple for now. Points are really straightforward. In fact, during most of the previous part of this series, Suzanne was an example of a point element that immediately grabs your attention by contrasting with the rest of the image. You already know of that magnetic power that it has and how to position it according to your intention. You can, of course, have multiple elements, and you'll remember, of course, that these will compete for attention between each other, and therefore you should balance them according with their visual weight, and again depending on your intention. Lines are useful to give direction to your scene and a sense of dynamic or lack thereof. Depending on their orientation relative to the frame, you can have several types of lines in your image, and different types of lines communicate different things. Horizontal lines express stability. Think of the horizon line, for example. Conversely, vertical lines can express movement because of gravity, or even power, if you imagine, for example, a tall figure in your scene. Diagonal lines are very dynamic, and not only they can give a stronger sense of movement than the verticals, they can even give a sense of speed. That's why you have a lot of images of cars that are taken either close up or with a wide angle lens, and that makes the parallel lines of the car become diagonal, therefore implying or emphasizing the dynamics and speed that the car expresses. Finally, you can also have curves, which are usually associated with fluidity or elegance. By the way, when you hear the term leading lines, those are the lines that direct the attention to your points of interest. For example, if we had a couple of diagonal lines here representing a road, for example. So let's draw them out with a grease pencil. Imagine we had this image here. These are all lines that are different. We could have vertical lines here, diagonal lines here, even the horizon line over here, and they're all pretty much leading lines because they're taking your eye back to Suzanne and not letting it go away from the frame. Every time it comes here, it goes back up to her. Now keep in mind that while you can have actual lines and actual shapes, lines and shapes are many times, if not most of the time, just implied. I mean, if you have a series of points, they make a line or a curve, and 3 points can imply a triangle, for example. A very effective and implied line, a special implied line, is actually the eye line. You know when you're talking to someone and suddenly they look over your shoulder and you're just compelled to look back to see what they were looking at? We like to see what other people are looking at, and because of that, the eye line is a very effective technique. For example, if you get a character in your scene, for example Suzanne here, to look at an object, let's add, say, a cube. There we go. The cube is suddenly more interesting because we look at Suzanne and she's looking at someone or at something, and we just follow her eye line towards the focal point. Now, in terms of shapes, you are mainly interested in triangles, rectangles, and circles. Triangles are very simple to achieve, since of course any 3 points will form a triangle unless they're on the same line. And yet they're very useful for making your scene look more organized or tied together. You can use them in many ways, but notice that the vertex that does not form a parallel with another one tends to get more attention. This is easier to explain if I just show you. So imagine we have like 3 Suzanne sisters here. See this one here? It tends to get more attention because these two are forming a parallel line with the frame. So it basically makes us, what did I do? It basically makes us interpret this as an arrow this way. Or if you just rotate everything, or just make her be at the top, it suddenly becomes an arrow upwards. So even though the interpretations are different, so in this case, in a pyramid shape, it usually is associated with stability since it has this base on the floor, and conversely, this is usually associated with instability and brings a lot more attention to this point because, you know, something's wrong here. Generally, it's that third point that is not parallel to something that grabs more attention. Okay, so speaking of grabbing attention, circular shapes have that exact effect. They draw you into whatever is inside of them. Let me grab a circle here. There we go. Let's align it to view. Put it right in the middle and scale it up. And yeah, let's extrude a little bit. There we go. So actually the circles are so effective at drawing your eye to whatever is inside of them that you have to use them with care. Anything that's outside of the circle will have minimal attention, so make sure you don't leave anything special between the circle and the borders of the frame. Again, like other shapes and lines, circles are usually implied. For example, if I get rid of this and just draw, say this is an island in the middle of the ocean and it's viewed from above, this is hardly a geometric circle. However, it will fulfill the circle's purpose of focusing attention on whatever is inside of it. So if your goal is to show the pirate ship that's anchored over here outside of the island, of course, you're probably better off with a lower perspective and just focusing on the ship itself, which therefore removes that circular impression of the island from the frame. Because with this, most of your attention will just go over here. Finally, rectangular shapes. Let me just get rid of, I can also get rid of a couple of Suzannes, and let's get a plane in here. Align it to view, and yeah, I'll just make it a frame. There we go. Rectangles, and of course squares as well, they're very formal and can communicate solidity or inflexibility. They're usually less implied and more deliberate. Instead of having 4 Suzannes, for example, as vertices, you actually have actual lines defining them if they want to emphasize that formality. You tend to see rectangular shapes in architecture, of course, for example, or like images of castles to really imply that head-on rectangular solid shape to communicate the solidity of the subject. Now, keep in mind that the shape is relative to the frame. So even if you do have a rectangular object like this frame here, it may not actually look rectangular due to perspective if you're not picturing it head on. So I can have this square here be like this, and this no longer serves the purpose of a rectangular shape. This is no longer very formal. Actually it has the diagonal lines that we talked about before, which makes it actually more dynamic. So keep that in mind. The shapes are always relative to the frame. Okay, so that's it for compositional elements. If you want to quickly apply what you've learned, have a look at your latest scene. Just like I said, zoom out until it's just a thumbnail and check a few things. For example, is there a clear point of interest? There doesn't have to be, it's just, you know what I'm saying. Are there any distinguishable lines, for example, that you didn't notice before? And are they agreeing with what you want to show? If you can see diagonal lines, for example, and you actually wanted to portray something more calm or peaceful, you may want to revise that and rearrange things. Are there any distinguishable shapes helping to put your scene together? Like if there's an overbearing circle, for example, did anything of importance get left outside of it? So with these abstractions, you can bring your scene back to basics and tidy it up before you move on to details. So finally, let's talk about light and colors. These subjects are immense. Actually, there are good tutorials out there just on the topic of how to light a scene or just on color, and even better books if you really want to take the technique to another level. What I'd like to do here then is to quickly talk about just the impact of your lighting and color decisions from a compositional point of view. As you will learn in any good tutorial on lighting, it is of the utmost importance. I mean, it is with light and shadow that you give three-dimensionality to your scene, and a nice continuous range between tones will generally make your image better looking. So you can learn various techniques to light your scene nicely, but no matter what technique you choose to apply to your scene, your goal should be to make it work with your composition, or in other words, to make it help you tell the story that you want to tell. So even after choosing one specific technique based on your needs, say for example you pick the three-point lighting system, your work is not done. You still have a few decisions to make. For example, how contrasty do I want my light to be? In other words, do I want my brighter spots to be much brighter than the midtones and the shadows much darker too? Or do I want them closer together, not very contrasting at all, so giving the image a more hazy, atmospheric feel? Or do I want my image to be more exposed, making everything brighter, or less exposed, giving a general darker mood? These decisions can change your final result quite a bit and help you better communicate your intent. So one thing to notice is that you can actually take these decisions into account while setting up your lighting, but you also have a degree of flexibility in post-production to further improve the final look. You may remember in the first part of the series when I talked about post-production and I messed a little bit with the contrast and brightness. That's what I'm talking about. Color and lighting go pretty much hand in hand, and so you have similar decisions to be taken when considering the colors you use in your scene. So a good tutorial will teach you to carefully pick your color palette using complementary colors. Let me grab the color picker here. So it can tell you, that colors on opposite sides of the color palette are complementary and therefore are nice to use. Or it can tell you that you can also use familiar colors to color your scene. For example, using adjacent colors like all these blues and started to go into the purples. So using different techniques will depend on what you want to communicate. Maybe you want to use colors in the same family to show harmony in the scene. Or maybe you'll want to use complementary colors to make the scene more dynamic or more tense. Maybe you want to desaturate the colors. If you go to saturation here, which basically brings the color inside the spectrum here, making it less blue all the way to white, or really shocking blue or baby blue or shocking rose or pink. So maybe you want to desaturate your colors for a more earthly look, or like a Mars look. Or you want to then throw in a more saturated color for a contrasting accent on the other earthly tones. Or maybe your image is actually all about form and texture, so you actually want to make everything black and white and completely remove saturation. These decisions, like all the decisions that we've been talking about throughout this series, are what composition is about. It's about utilizing your coloring techniques, your lighting techniques, right alongside all your other technical abilities in modeling and shading and whatnot, based solely on the decisions that you make to tell the story that you want to tell. And that's it. I hope this has been useful to you again, and stay tuned, or stay tuned, for the final part of this series. I intend to show you all this stuff in action, so I'll see you soon.